prospect, could have obviously sold to ENRC for price X, but it didn't. It first sold to Dan Gertler, sometimes a matter of days before ENRC acquires this thing. Gertler is the middleman. So using all sorts of BVI companies and all this sort of stuff, the Congolese state sells an asset to Gertler. Gertler then flips it on to a mining company, in the cases we're talking about, ENRC, for a lot more, generating profit out of thin air. And divert, so that the full amount of the sale price could obviously have gone to the Congolese state.
Yeah,
one of the most needy.
But the sale price was never disclosed. We don't actually know how much.
We know that in some cases, I don't have them in front of me, but we know that these are just to give you an idea of the scale of ENRC's acquisitions. So there are things that they're buying in Zambia and South Africa with deals in the hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions.
Right.
But then there's another strange thing to ENRC's African deals.
Yeah.
Often they paid massively more than what the thing was worth. So there are sort of paper trails that are hard to find, but they can be found, and they're in the book. Instances where ENRC was paying vastly more than what a prospect was worth. And in some cases, it was paying that money to obscure companies, and those companies seem to have been controlled by the oligarchs themselves. Right. So what was happening was that, and again, the oligarchs and the companies say they haven't done anything wrong. What was happening pretty clearly from their own corporate filings was that ENRC, the public listed company in London, in which, if we have any pensions left, they're invested in that kind of thing, FTSE 100 company, part owned by all of us, really.
Yeah.
And with rights and responsibilities and the protection of the law and so on. Money is being siphoned out of that into the darker corners of the financial system and into privately owned companies controlled by the oligarchs themselves. That's but at what appears to have been, and again, ENRC says they haven't done anything wrong, what appears to be massively inflated rates to drain money from the public company into the more secretive vehicles.
And in fact, ENRC delisted from the London Stock Exchange, right? I mean, after there was this flood of allegations of wrongdoing, corruption, and whatever, which is a few months
after the SFO began to criminal investigation.
So they went private again, and of course, there's limited then disclosure on what they're doing. So it's
sure. They went private. They always had the best advice. They had Peter Mandelson helping on some of the, well, not actually advising them, advising the Kazakh government on how to do that. Tony Blair, meanwhile, was advising the Kazakh dictator on how to massage his image after his security forces had massacred a load of oil workers. These guys, they're blessed to have the best advisors on how to manage democracies.
So not only does Britain, which makes a big deal out of the Magna Carta and the rights of men and women, host the financial institutions that enable such organizations to operate beyond scrutiny, they actually provide the politicians who then become advisors to them. Could you say something about Zimbabwe? You talk in your book about how Emerson Mnangagwa has took over from Robert Mugabe in 2017 and established or reinforced the relationship with ENRC. There are a couple of Zimbabwe's own oligarchs, people like Billy Rothenbach, who has been on the scene, in Zimbabwe for 4 decades, in fact, and he's no longer has a competitor in the shape of John Bredenkamp, who died this year. So Billy's had the feel to himself as one of the old roadie investors. Not that he would like to be necessarily known as a roadie, but many Zimbabweans see him that way. So could you explain what ENRC's been doing in Zimbabwe, how Billy Rothenbach fits into that picture?
Absolutely. I should say that I had, in the 600 pages of legal correspondence that I got before the book came out, twice the length of the book itself. Right. One of the most spectacular was from Rautenbach's lawyers in Johannesburg, who told me that I would feel the full might of the law at some point.
He should know, yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot. I've tried to piece together Rautenbach's sort of whole story in the book to the extent that I can. I'm sure there's bits missing, but the crucial moments. And Rautenbach, has this history in the sort of pillage economy of Congo during the war. And he's constantly falling out of favor, and he's fantastically sort of irritable, irascible man, but also this charmer. But anyway, the crucial moment, I think, that you're talking about is and again, it's an example of how these networks of kleptocracies have gone global. From stretching into democracies, but also connecting kleptocrats. So you had that moment, incredibly dramatic moment in 2008 when it looked like Morgan Tsvangirai was going to beat Robert Mugabe in that election. In fact,
he did.
It's widely agreed that he did. And between the first round, where the results were suppressed, and eventually a result was announced that meant there had to be a second round, clearly fraudulently, or pretty clearly fraudulently. But something under the radar happened, which is that one of the big platinum prospects in Zimbabwe was taken from Anglo-American under pressure from ZANU-PF. They relinquished it. And it was given to an offshore company controlled by Billy Rautenbach. A man for a crisis, if you are the Zimbabwean ZANU-PF kleptocratic regime. What Rautenbach does, in short order, is sell this prospect to Camek, another London-listed mining company run by, the names who observers of the London Africa mining scene will know well: Phil Edmonds and Andrew Groves.
Phil Edmonds, of course, is a former cricket player.
Former England spin bowler, indeed. And Groves is the son of a roadie policeman. And part of this deal, remember, this is Mugabe's on the brink when this is happening. Part of this deal is to supply a $100 million loan. It's actually a sort of advance on platinum sales to the ZANU-PF government immediately. $100 million. I mean, $100 million could swing the course of a British election. $100 million in the Zimbabwean election, you win. That Mugabe brings in this war chest. Immediately, the brutalization campaign starts. Beating people to death. Operation Where Did You Put Your Vote? Terrifying the opposition to the point that Tsvangirai has to pull out of the runoff because the violence is just escalating and escalating and escalating. Mugabe wins in this farce, and then Thabo Mbeki, at the time South African president, orchestrates a power sharing deal, and Tsvangirai is sold down the river. He has 5 years in power. 5 years of share power, and then we know the tragic remainder of that story. But on the business side, so these cogs all moved, these money cogs all moved. Everyone got what they wanted. Rautenbach got the platinum asset. He got to sell it. Camek, they got to buy it. But ZANU-PF got their money. But what the business guys needed, what the money guys needed, was to cash out. So after the election, once everything's calmed down a bit, Camek sells the whole company. Zimbabwean platinum prospect, its Congolese mining interests. Sells the whole thing to who? ENRC. ENRC pay them out. Rautenbach gets paid out, even though by then he's under sanctions. One of the big mysteries is how a London-listed company was able to pay to buy a company, part of whose shares were owned by a man under sanctions. The UK Treasury refuses to explain this. So there we have, just to step back from that a second, a group of ex-Soviet oligarchs who started off in the sort of KGB circles, listing a company in London, surrounded by people like top British politicians and knights, and Paul Judge, who used to run the Conservative Party, on their board, so on and so forth. Cashing out an ex-England cricketer Rhodey the copper's son, and rally driving Rautenbach himself, sustaining a Zimbabwean kleptocrat. And then, just to give you the last link of this particular alliance, one of the three oligarchs, Mashkevich, he has a great friend called Tevfik, and their businesses just seem to overlap. He helps Tevfik as he goes to New York. He's a sort of he lends his billionaire gravitas to Tevfik. Tevfik goes to New York. He heads for American real estate, and he starts building buildings that bear the name of Donald Trump.
Right. And one of his best friends is a guy called Felix Sater, right?
That's Tevfik's business partner.
Yeah. And they are, again, I believe there was an event in Soho.
They built the Trump Soho.
Yeah.
Bayrock, this company,
right.
Who have one of the ENRC oligarchs as their kind of. They deny that they listed him once as a source of finance. They deny that he put money in. It's unclear, but he certainly was a sort of angel for this company.
Right.
Turning up at their meetings and impressing people. Using the power of his influence and his using the sheer kind of halo of his massive wealth to advance their interests.
So that's just another example of the reach of these guys from Kazakhstan.
Absolutely, and then you have it's an example of Kleptopia. That's why the book's called that, of these global alliances of corruption. And then you have Trump behaving now like you've covered more African elections than any British journalist, I would have thought. And I imagine, it certainly seems to me that you look at Trump, he's behaving like the more grotesque end of Nigerian kleptocrat going into an election. You have to win because you have to maintain immunity from prosecution. Given all the shady deals in your past. And if you can't win, you have to discredit the whole election. It looks very familiar to this, but obviously Americans are bewildered by it.
It always helps as well if you can pack the Supreme Court before the election. And that's another piece of African advice Trump seems to have taken.
Always nice.
I know you're under time pressure. I just wanted to get to the end of your book, which covers 1,000,001 other things. It's not just about Africa. In fact, Africa's, important part of the jigsaw. But you kind of end up, you talked about this concept of kleptopia and where the hell the world is heading. And you paint a pretty bleak picture of the kleptocrats' union, if you like, saying, right, the world is shortly going to run out of resources. And I guess in an era of pandemic and climate crisis, that's evident to everybody. So our strategy is to corner the resources, corner the money, corner the best things, and like the book, build a wall around us. So with that scenario in mind, if that's what's really happening, and I guess if you look around the world's gated communities, it does seem to be going in that direction. Can you step out of being a totally objective analytical journalist for a moment? What would you like to see happen? What can you do about this? I mean, part of what you're doing is exposing it, but it's what else can be done to rein this sort of stuff in?
Well, first thing I'd say is I've always got time for you, Patrick. We can carry on a bit longer, but although I think the readers might have had enough soon, but the listeners. But anyway,
your children certainly would have had enough.
My daughter, yeah. But the one thing I'd say is that the secrets of resistance are not rocket science. The hero of our book is Nigel Wilkins, and he is I don't like the expression an ordinary bloke. I mean, aren't we all? But he's a man of no great renown, but of extraordinary character, and he finds himself working in a bank's office, the office of a Swiss bank, round the corner from the Bank of England. It's in the heart of the city of London, the aorta of the world's dirty money.
Right.
And he starts to discover some secrets there that readers of the book will discover. And as a result, life becomes very difficult for him, but he will not bend. And he says, this is obviously wrong. And even when the regulators and everyone else turns on him, he just says, bollocks. This is all filthy. I'm not having it. And he just won't rest. And Nigel's story is tragic in a way because of what he's put